Here we go. From the Silver Creek Studios, I'm Jared, and this is the BFIBs Almanac. This week's episode, I'm kind of winging it a little bit. I've had a cold, and I haven't really had a chance to do a whole lot of research. I didn't even think I was going to record today. I've been coughing all day. But I decided to suck it up and tough it out for you guys and try to put an episode together. So there hasn't been a ton of action in spring training over the last few days. There's been a few developments. A few guys have done well, a few guys haven't. But we've basically been seeing a lot more of the same. Today, this is Sunday, Daniel Ponce de Leon pitched. He looked pretty good through 2 innings, and then in the third, he really kind of let it get away from him, put a few runs up on the board. But yesterday, on Saturday, Michael Wacha pitched and had the best outing of spring so far. He went 3 innings pitched, no hits, 4 strikeouts. The only base runner was a 4-pitch walk. So very good outing for him. Nice to see him kind of get settled in. He went 3 innings. Looked solid. I expect to see him do even better. Well, not better, but equally good. More innings is what I meant. Next time out. So good to see that from Wacha. I think at this point it looks like John Gant is probably lining up to be the 5th starter to kind of take Martinez's place. For one, he's out of options, so he can't be sent back down to Memphis without being waived first. And certainly, as good as he has pitched in the big leagues last year for us, someone would pick him up on waivers before we could get him back. So I don't think they want to risk that. So I'm pretty sure he's going to make the team, whether it's as a starter or reliever. And at this point, he's been steady enough that he kind of looks like, barring some collapse by him, it looks like he'll probably get that 5th starter role. Now, what might complicate that would be Alex Reyes. He's supposed to pitch coming up in the next couple days. And he, has that electric stuff that could get the team excited enough to name him the 5th starter. But I also know they want to watch his innings. And so a good way to keep a guy on an innings limit is to put him in the bullpen. So I wouldn't doubt it if Reyes is in the pen and Gant is that 5th starter. But that being said, my point that I brought up in the last episode, how the hitters haven't been hitting, they've hit a little better. Matt Carpenter had a home run today, his first of spring. Was it his first? I can't remember if it was his first or second. Second, I think. It was an opposite field shot. It was very well hit. Tyler O'Neill hit another home run today. He now has 3 home runs. He only has 3 hits, so all 3 of his hits are home runs. They've all been very well-struck balls. The one today was a line drive over the fence. He didn't even know it was a home run until they told him. So good to see him lining it up, squaring it up, not necessarily going for launch angle. He's trying to be a line drive hitter. He's trying to take that Jeff Albert hitting coach approach and not just go for home runs. But at this point, they're turning into home runs, which you're fine with. So a lot of the other guys aren't really hitting. Fowler did have a little bloop single and ended up coming around and, doing his job. Goldschmidt hit one through the shortstop, third base gap. But everybody's really not too locked in yet. Again, the bench guys, the young guys, have been doing most of the damage. Again, the bench guys, the young guys have been doing most of the damage. So, I'd really like to see the starters take off a little bit more. And I think they will once they get steady playing time in innings and they aren't coming out in the 3rd inning or whatever. And they have a consistent lineup. I think they'll do better, but it's just in the back of my mind, something to be a little nervous about. All right, the main thing that I wanted to talk about today, the biggest news in the last few days across baseball, is the Bryce Harper signing. Signed with the Phillies for 13 years, $330 million. So like many people and many fans, when I first saw that, I was shocked. I couldn't believe they went that long, 13 years. 10 years seemed like too long for a lot of people. I think that's part of why the Cardinals didn't want to get involved. A lot of teams didn't want to get involved for that 10 years. There were rumors that the Dodgers were offering like a 4 or 5 year, $40 million a year contract. I think a couple other teams were trying to get involved in that 8-year. So when this 13-year deal came up, it was like, what the heck? How did that happen? And I really thought it was a bad deal at first. In case you don't know the backstory of that, Giancarlo Stanton signed a 13-year, $325 million deal. So this eclipsed that deal. Same number of years and $5 million more. So I really think that's kind of what they were going for. They wanted to have the longest contract, highest value. They got it. Now, when you do the math on that, 13 years, $330 million divided by 13 comes out to roughly $25.5 million. So, not the highest AAV by quite a bit. Machado got $30 million AAV, and Nolan Arenado just signed an extension in the range of like 32.5 a year AAV. So he really was going for that largest overall amount and not the AAV, which is fine. Where it gets interesting and where I kind of changed my mind on the whole thing is when I really broke down the details of the contract. So here's how it shakes out. The first year, he's going to get $30 million. And actually, I believe $20 million of that $30 million in the first year is a bonus. So he'll get that up front. The rest will be, prorated over the season. Then it'll be 9 years of $26 million a year. And then the last 3 seasons will be $22 million each. So this is going to take him to age 39 or 40. I forget where he'll turn in there, but which is definitely old for a power hitting baseball player. Post steroids era, guys don't age like they used to, and you can expect his production to drop off. But that being said, the last 3 years of this are only $22 million a year. Now, that may still sound like a lot, and it is, but in the grand scheme of things, that is not that much to pay a slugging outfielder. And in 10 years, $22 million definitely may not seem like a much. Now, we don't know what's going to happen with the next collective bargaining agreement. Maybe salaries and all this stuff is going to drastically change and get lower. But I would expect salaries to continue to increase over the next decade. And by then, $22 million paid to an aging veteran may not seem like much at all. So really, the Phillies were able to sort of spread out this cost. And there was an article on ESPN about the backstory of this contract and how it kind of fell together. And he really had a dollar amount that he wanted to stick with, which was this $330 million. He didn't want to get less than that. And the Phillies originally, well, I don't know about originally, at some point in the process, they tried to extend this out over 15 years, which would bring down that AAV even more. But he didn't want that. They offered 14. He said no. They were, at some point, the talks were falling apart, and then they came back with 13. He agreed. They structured the years and the dollars the way that they did, and the contract got signed. So, again, when you first look at those years, 13 years seems way too long, and the amount total seems really high. I think, some people were scared of 300, and he got 330. But the fact that he's only getting 26 a year for most of this contract, which again is fairly reasonable compared to what some of these guys are getting when you're trying to pay for premium top tier talent. And then to finish it out with $22 million for the last 3 seasons is very reasonable. Really what they did was they paid the amount that they originally talked about paying. Everybody kind of had that 10-year, $300 million plus price in mind. They agreed to pay that amount. Then it was just a matter of how are we going to pay for this? So we're going to spread it out over 13 years. We're going to make it less at the end. I believe he's got a no trade clause in there, but that doesn't mean he can't be traded. It just means he would have to agree to be traded. So potentially at the end of his career, if his numbers are off a little or they feel like they need to trade him or maybe he just doesn't want to be there anymore, potentially he could get traded. He does have no opt-out, so he cannot opt out of this, and that is one thing that he apparently pushed for. He didn't want to have an opt-out, which normally players would. They want to be able to opt out early and get more money if the market changes. He didn't want to do that as a symbol of his commitment to the team in order to potentially bring in other free agents, which is interesting because there's a big name free agent who's going to be available in a couple of years who is a big fan of Philadelphia. Hopefully you know who that is, but if you don't, Mike Trout, by all accounts considered the greatest player in baseball for the last, 5, 6, 7 years, pretty much since he broke into the league. And he is going to be a free agent. I forgot to look it up. I want to say it's after the 2020 season, so going into 2021, but it could be after the 2021. Either way, he's going to be a free agent soon, and I don't think the Angels are going to be able to offer him anything to keep him there. I think he's going to want to test the waters. I think he's tired of the Angels not being able to put a winning product around him, and he would love to go back home, so to speak, to Philadelphia. He's from New Jersey, but he's a Philly guy. He roots for the Eagles. He roots for the Sixers. I think he rooted for the Phillies when he was growing up. And I think this was a great way to entice him to stay. So they don't have all their money tied up in Bryce Harper. They're going to have a couple contracts coming off the books in a couple years when Trout is available. And I think he is going to want to go to the Phillies. So that'll be pretty interesting to see Trout and Harper on the same team. So, like I said, I just wanted to touch on how I kind of flip-flopped on this. At first, I thought it was a terrible deal, way too many years, too many dollars. But the more I broke it down, I thought, man, this really seems kind of reasonable. Assuming he stays healthy and productive for most of that contract, even if it's just the first 8, 9, 10 years, they're going to get a premium player with great marketability for a relatively reasonable price. And even at the end of that deal, they don't have to feel like they're hamstrung with what they're paying him. So do I think the Cardinals should have done a deal like that? Not necessarily. I mean, yeah, I wanted them to go after Harper for the right price and the right deal. I would have preferred less years, more money. But it's kind of funny. I think everybody sort of said that when the 10-year, $300 million price was being thrown around. That was sort of the limit of what a lot of teams said they were willing to do. But some people suggested, hey, why don't we go shorter years, higher AAV, and we might be able to get him. That way we're not stuck with him in 10 years or 8 years or whatever. We can get him for 6 or 7 for 35 to 40 million a year. But nobody really ever considered going longer for less money a year, or at least I never heard anybody talking about that. And it actually seems kind of reasonable, like I said. So I'm really interested to see how this works out. Now, it's going to be a while, 10, 11, 12, 13 years before we really know how this works out. And I think in reality, how can you possibly expect it to work out? It seems like none of these 10-year deals ever work out. Look at A-Rod at the end of his deals. Look at Albert right now at the end of his deal. You've got Cano signed a deal, a long deal like that. He's not working out now at the end. Miguel Cabrera has been injured for a little while. His numbers are dropping off, though he did have a good season mixed in there recently. I'm trying to think of what some of these other really long deals have been. But generally, they just don't work out. These guys just break down faster than they can make up for. And you end up paying for it, especially these teams that structure it where the bulk of the money is at the end. To me, that's the biggest mistake because you know you're not going to get as much performance. You're going to have to do something to help your team to compensate for that lack of performance. And you're paying that player even more at the end. So these teams that do that, and it does depend on their finances and what they have committed to current players now, and every team's a little different with their payroll and their roster. But when you can structure something like this to be paying a guy less and less and less as the contract goes on, that's the way to do it. Commit your money now when you know they're young and their potential is right there and they're going to perform to their peak. And hopefully don't pay them as much when they're starting to drop off, and you might need to make a move. You might need to bring in another guy. You can afford to do it because you don't have all your money tied up. So I think it was a good move for the Phillies. I'm curious to see how he does. He did, he's obviously showing up to spring late. So hopefully he's been getting his workouts in, and, he'll be able to kind of step in and take off, so to speak. But I'm excited to see what he does. I'm not a Bryce Harper hater. I'm also not, a fanboy either. I think he's a good player. I think he's better than his WAR showed last year. He's better than some people give him credit for. His defense is lacking, but that's not why you sign Bryce Harper. So I'm curious to see what he does. I'm curious to see how it affects other things like signing Paul Goldschmidt. So when Arenado signed for 260 or whatever it was for 8 years, an AAV of 32.5, I think, that really kind of made me nervous, thinking that, man, that bumps the market up for Goldschmidt. They're not going to go 8 years, but they might have to go 4 or 5 at 30, 32, 34, 35, now that Harper signed for 26 a year, and 22 at the end, it does sort of complicate that. What exactly is the market now? Is it longer with smaller AAV? I don't see the Cardinals wanting to go longer into the late 30s, age 40, season for a player, but maybe they'll realize, hey, this is a little more palatable. If we can sign him, instead of 4 years, maybe 6 for, a little bit less a year and kind of tail it off at the end there, make it more reasonable. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. So that's pretty much all I've got. I apologize. I've been holding coughs in. Actually, I've been coughing constantly and just going to have to edit it out. But thanks for listening. I hope you're getting a little value from this. I try to find out some details that maybe aren't out there, on the headlines, so you kind of have to do some digging. And I hope I'm talking about content that people are interested in. I think everybody kind of wanted to know where Harper would end up and why and how it all came out. And everybody's curious to see how this Cardinals rotation shakes out. So I'll keep an eye on that, and I will keep you all posted with plenty of updates. So until next time, I'm Jared, and this is the BFIBs Almanac.